started with giving everyone your background information on how you got your start in doing what you do now.
Yeah, so it's been a long road, but I was trained as a chiropractor. So I went to grad school, got my doctorate in chiropractic and master's in sports rehab. So I went to school in Portland. I moved to San Francisco and opened up a clinic with another guy. We grew to 6 locations within a couple of years.
Wow.
So it's pretty crazy growth. A lot of learning.
What do you attribute that rapid, explosive growth to?
My dad is a business owner, and he instilled a lot of entrepreneurial spirit in me. So once I got to school, I knew that I wanted to grow my impact and have as much impact as possible.
Yeah.
And so in the chiro world, in a service-based industry, like you have to multiply yourself. You have to scale beyond yourself. And so it was, okay, how do we systemize this stuff? And how do we make protocols that we can train other clinicians and the other clinicians can do the same thing that we're doing?
And you were doing that since day one?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's impressive because usually in that kind of business, people will not do that for years. Yeah.
So the other guy that I joined on with had been in practice for 2 years. And I came on board, and the first day I was like, where's the training manual? He's like, what training manual? I was like, why is there no onboarding documents? I was like, we need to make systems. We need to have protocols. We need to like scale this thing. We need to get like out of our hands and put ourselves out of work every single day.
Yeah.
And so that was always a point of view that I held even in graduate school.
Okay.
And I was doing that in the clinic system in grad school, like trying to create this little scalable system within our own school. And so that was always a point of view of mine. I was like doing that and doing that fast. I realized very early on that was not a sustainable model. So even going from 1 to 6 locations, it was like, it's crazy for service-based industry. You're not going to make much of an impact there. So I did the math, the arithmetic, and it was, how many people could I actually impact? Maybe 10,000, 20,000 in the course of an entire career. Mm-hmm. Because the way we practice is that it wasn't, rack 'em, crack 'em style chiropractic where people come in and go out in 2 minutes. It was, spend an hour with people working on their movement and their mobility, and then transitioning to functional medicine and doing that work as well. Yeah. I mean, that's even longer case times. And so maybe 10 people a day max. And so I was thinking, okay, well, what do people actually need here? And like, what is the biggest thing holding them back? And what I realized is that it was nutrition. So if somebody had a strain or a sprain or any kind of joint injury, or they had a gut problem or diabetes or weight loss they needed to handle, nutrition was always the biggest lever that they could pull to have an effect on it, faster recovery times, faster healing times. And so I thought, okay, how can we create a scalable system where I can be hands-off and multiply myself infinitely so people can have better access to nutrition? And so that was one of the first companies I started that was outside of my chiropractic training. And so that was a company called Equip. And so we have, with that, we started whole food products, so like a beef isolate protein powder, for example. And with that, I was using it as a mechanism to train people on nutrition. And so when they get this bag of protein powder, and they have it and they feel amazing, they think, oh, well, what the hell's going on here? And so we only use very few ingredients and can teach them with content and education why whole food and nutrition is important to them. Instead of so I had a website before that had a lot of traction, just personal articles and stuff like that. And I realized that the people going to that website, that was just a confirmation bias thing. Like it was about like why grass-fed meat was good, example, right? Yeah. It was just people being like, yeah, hooray, grass-fed beef. I've been eating it forever. Like people weren't learning anything new. Like I wasn't getting in and changing anyone's behavior. Mm-hmm. And so I knew that I needed to get outside of that system to do so. So that scaled. It went a little crazy. 2 years ago, I left my clinic. So I sold them back to my business partner that I started them with. And then from there, started thinking about, okay, now that we have this in place, what are the other therapies that I was using that I'm seeing problems with now? And so that's when we started Perfect Keto, which was another company kind of in the same space. And so the problems I saw there were that it was really hard to get into ketosis for my patients. So they used it for therapy for a lot of people. And it was hard to stick to. Nobody knew what the hell was going on. There was no content. There was no cohesiveness in the information. So number one goal was to provide just a wealth of content and a content library and make it easy to get into and stay into ketosis. And so that's the goal of that company. Okay. There's been tons of offshoots since then, but like it's been crazy. I don't even know how to say what I am doing right now. People ask what I do. Like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out.
It seems like so many people that you and I both know. That's the answer. Yeah.
I don't know. It depends on the day.
Right. So now when you started Equip, was there a challenge? Was there people saying to you, dude, you're never going to make money. The margins are going to be so high with such high quality ingredients. You got to put all this shit in it. Because most supplements are crap. They're filled with, fillers and artificial ingredients. And you guys are putting high quality. And what I love is there's like 4 ingredients.
Right.
Matt, you're like,
well, the way we make products, the margins are shit.
Yeah.
So
I'm sure.
That's the way it is.
Right.
But this is the way that the industry works. Like, yes, you're right. People are like, it's too crowded. Like the supplement industry is crazy. But I always ask, like, I went through the whole gamut when I was younger too, like working out and taking all these disgusting supplements that made me want to like rip the wallpaper off the wall before I worked out, like just awful.
Yeah.
And so I was like, there has to be a better way. Like, why aren't there any whole food ingredients? Like, why do you need these stabilizers and these flow agents and things like that in it?
Mm-hmm.
And so when we first got it started, we had to learn a lot of this stuff the hard way. And so, for instance, like one of the first manufacturing runs we did, everything was paid out of pocket too. So like for me at the time, it was pretty much all the money that I had. I sunk into the first manufacturing run. The product was supposed to be, let's say, like 480 grams, right? It came back and I put it on a scale and it weighed like 570 grams. It's like, what the hell is this, right? And it turned out that the manufacturer goes, oh, well, it's just industry standard. We have to make the machines run faster, so we put these flow agents in it. And I look up these flow agents. They're disruptive to the gut. They are terrible for your brain. Like, it's just poison, essentially. And then they go, oh, you don't have to put it in the label. Nobody does. And so that turned into a huge dispute. Yeah, we couldn't launch a product because like I wanted to take the product myself. I was still in my clinic at the time. Like I wanted to give it to my patients and feel good about it, obviously. And so that was a huge legal thing. Then we had to find a manufacturer. I called around maybe 25 manufacturers, and no one would take a contract of making our supplement because we didn't have these expedients and flow agents in it. Because what happens is they can make the machine sticky, and it can degrade the machines.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's like I do not know any other companies that don't put this stuff in there. I'm sure there's something that exists, but like I don't know of any personally that have like the same type of powders or protein powders that don't do this and don't disclose the information. So technically, you don't have to put it on the label if it's under 2%.
Yeah.
Industry technicality, right? And the FDA doesn't regulate supplements. And so you're, as a brand, as a vendor, you are responsible for regulating your own products. And so what does that mean? It means you can put whatever you want on the ingredient label and no one knows, no one cares.
So scary for people.
Yeah. And so when I found this, I was like, oh shit, like now I really, really have to get after this and start making products that are actually educating people about like why this industry is not great. And I think that just that authenticity of trying to do it the right way has caught on, and we've had a lot of support from people who just don't want all the crap in their food, and like who are starting to realize it themselves. Like even stuff that says it's super clean, they try the difference between our products and theirs, and they have lower inflammation, less bloating, things like that. That's super important to people now. Yeah. So yeah, it's been yes, it's a disgusting industry, and it's like we've gone through a lot of this type of stuff. Where like now we're at the scale we're at, like supply is becoming an issue, and like there's all these challenges that if we had worse products or worse quality, we could just jump over. But like the standard that we have is like it makes things very, very difficult. But also I think it makes us really unique in the space. And so like yes, it's hard, but I think we stand out pretty clear.
Yeah, definitely. We're doing. Now, if someone was going to go into their pantry right now and they see certain ingredients, there's probably a million of them, but what are some, if they see them on the bottle, just throw it in the garbage? Like it's
well, anything you can't pronounce, that's always like the golden rule, right? But like things like artificial sweeteners are known to destroy your gut microbiome, cause potentially brain cancer, things like that. And so like anything artificial as far as a sweetener, I mean, anything chemical that you don't need, you can get rid of it. Like if you can't explain in an ingredient panel what that ingredient is for, then get rid of it. Yeah. And so magnesium stearate's another one of these things, silicone dioxide.
Yeah, what are those exactly for people who don't know?
So those are things that either help it mix up well. And it's like when you shake some of our products in a shaker, you'll notice some separation or some foaming. So there's anti-foaming agents. So it just serves no purpose other than the shake doesn't foam, which just settles in 20 seconds.
Right.
Okay. There's another one that, artificial colors, obviously, like.
And so like magnesium stearate and those other things, what are those doing to you?
So those are a flow agent, and those are also to help after you shake it.
Right.
To
but
separate.
What are they doing to your health?
Right. Same thing with that. So most of these chemicals, your gut lining is very, very tight. So these things called gap junctions in between your gut cells. And so those are very tightly regulated. So when you eat food, certain nutrients can pass through your gut lining, right? And so if you have food, like things that aren't real, or things like these magnesium stearate, silicone dioxide in gums especially, and artificial sweeteners have been shown to do this too, they get into that gap junction and start splitting it apart. And so this goes down the road of what people will call like a leaky gut syndrome, or things like this, where then next time you eat something, anything else, what it is, like things that shouldn't be getting in your bloodstream start getting in there. And that causes an inflammation response and some type of autoimmune response depending on the severity of it. Right. And so gut problems are like the worst problem you could have, because things that shouldn't be in your body get in your body. Right. And so that's your first line of defense when you eat a food. It goes to your gut and your body decides, okay, this should go in versus this should not go in. And so you can start creating a lot of massive inflammation by starting picking away at your gap junctions in your gut cells. And so like that's a very, very important thing, that these things are just unnecessary and contribute to this. So
yeah.
yeah.
I know what's the deal with those gums? And some people say, oh, it's fine if it's organic guar gum or something like that.
And so some of them have shown to, like, so for instance, like an acacia fiber or acacia gum can be beneficial. So like it just depends on when it's metabolized by your gut.
Okay.
And so some like xanthan gum has been shown to actually disrupt this gap junction in your gut. For instance, acacia fiber doesn't digest immediately and actually goes to your large colon, and at that, like, it feeds beneficial gut bacteria. So some can actually be beneficial, and some can be harmful. Okay. It's just like most of the time they're not necessary. Yeah. And so this is another thing that, like, if it's not necessary, why is it there? Right. Yeah. Just so it looks good or so it flows better through machines is crazy.
Yeah. So what was the first product you guys decided to do?
The first one was a pre-workout. So I was working with a lot of athletes at the time, and that was the biggest thing that I had trouble with in the past, was just the crazy artificial everything in it, like the synthetic caffeine, like just jacked my heart rate up.
Can't sleep.
Yeah, I can't sleep. And everything was dosed at an amount that didn't make sense. And so, okay, creatine, we know that above about 3 grams is an effective dose. Like all the literature says, like, 3 to 5 grams, 3 to 5 grams. Why is it only 500 milligrams in all products?
Exactly.
That was the same thing for every active ingredient. And that's why when we launched that product, the manufacturer, the first one and the second one and the third one, were like, you're never going to make any money on this. Like, what are you going to price this at $100, $150? Because our cost was so significant, because we had actually active amounts of the ingredient for every line ingredient. And so instead of having a proprietary blend or an underdose things, just so I can say I have arginine, BCAAs, and this stuff in it, it was actually effective dosing at all these different levels. Yeah. And so that made it extremely expensive. And so that was the first product. And then the second one was the beef isolate protein powder,
which I want to discuss in a sec. So for people who don't know, what is a proprietary blend? Because that's another way just to pull the wool over people's eyes.
So this is what you do with a proprietary blend. It is, again, an undisclosed amount of the ingredients. So you can say, like, okay, this proprietary blend has ingredient A, B, C, D, E, F, G, right? But ingredient D, for example, is nominal cost. It's like basically free to put an ingredient. So you put it, let's say the proprietary blend at 1 gram, where you put 950 milligrams of ingredient D in there, and then the rest is just in there. So you can say technically that it has these other ingredients, like, oh, high ingredient A, but it's in a proprietary blend, so you can actually see how much is in there. Yeah. And the thing is, like, companies try to make that so that people don't steal their formula, and that's what they say. Right. They do it so they can make a really cheap product. Yeah. And so you're not actually getting the effective amounts as you're getting. Another study I saw recently was that 87% of supplements tested, randomly picked on the market, did not even contain at all the main ingredient that was purported was on the label. Wow. Like, it wasn't even in the product. Yeah. And so this is another thing where it's like self-regulation of FDA. So, like, even if it's on the label, even if it's in a proprietary blend, does it really matter? No. And this is where, like, I was like, okay, well, how do we get around that? And so we publish our certificate of analysis, and we third-party test all of our products and make that public information. And we are very, like, open source about what we're doing. So you can see line by line whatever we're doing. Yeah. And you can, like, if people wanted to rip our product off, go ahead. Like, I don't care. My goal is to have these in people's hands and get them good products. And so if you want to do that, that's fine. But it's like, it's super important to realize, like, as a manufacturer of this, like, we regulate ourselves. Like, we don't have to, you can put whatever you want in it. Like, unless there's third-party labs showing what's in the product, I would not trust it. Yeah.
What caused you to have beef protein as your second product?
I just saw, so many of my patients.
And are you anti-dairy?
I'm not. I'm not myself. Okay. But I saw so many of my patients that had problems with dairy. So, like, I think dairy is one of these things where, like, people are in a camp of, like, everybody should have it and it's amazing, or nobody should have it. And I think the answer lies somewhere in between, where, some people can thrive on it. And I think that if you're, like, for instance, like, what very Western European cultures, there's no problem. Like, I know for some people that they get tons of gut problems, a lot of inflammation, a lot of acne, no matter the source. I don't care if it's like raw milk and all the most amazing ingredients. Like, some people can't process it. So I noticed that there's a few different things. One, whey is just like the leftover of cheese and milk production. And so
you're not a fan of whey?
I think there's some use for it, but I think that it's just basically pure amino acids, right? Okay. And so when I was formulating the beef isolate protein products, one thing I was thinking about is like, what should people be eating, and how can we give them closer to that? Like, people don't generally look for eating milk and cheese leftovers, right? Like it's a byproduct of real food, right? So like you're going down and isolating so much. We took actual beef chunks, whole beef, and then cooked that down kind of like a bone broth, and then spray dried that to make a powder. And so you're getting like 30-40% of collagen and gelatin, and then 70% muscle meat, which is about the ratio of a human body. And so when you work out, for example, people like to just like think protein is protein, right? And so you're damaging muscle cells and you need to build them back up. Well, it turns out you have connective tissue, right, in between joints. You have skin, you have ligaments, you have tendons, you have intestines, you have arteries and blood vessels. Like all that stuff is made of collagen. So if like people eat enough lean muscle meat, they need to have more collagen. They need to have a more complete food source. Yeah. And so this is a thing too, is like using that complete whole food nutrition and serving that to people instead of a leftover of milk production is something that like I thought just made way more sense. That, and I think it's just a more widely acceptable product for more people. So like if there's some people can handle whey, that's fine, but some people can't. And I know that from just working with tons of people in the subject. Yeah. So like I'm not against it per se, but I just think that its use is limited for what people actually need. Like people need to eat more collagen, need to eat more real food ingredients. Yeah. And a lot of the micronutrients that come in beef is like actually are retained in the production. So just like how you would have bone broth, same type of situation. Yeah. So a lot of fat soluble vitamins are still on there instead of it getting all filtered out. And so if you look at like a micronutrient composition, food goes like this. It goes grass-fed organ meats, number one, like most nutritious food ever. Then grass-fed beef and usually red meat, like lamb, bison, beef, stuff like that. And then way below that, we have like herbs, and then below that, vegetables. And so if you're looking at actual nutrition per gram, meat and animal products have just below organ meats, by far the best nutrition. And so like that's what I was trying to encapsulate into a protein powder instead of just a raw protein source. Yeah.
So expand on that a little bit more, because still, people are still confused about that. That will lead them to a vegetarian or vegan diet because they think you just dispel that myth, kind of. Explain that.
What myth? That meat's bad for you?
No, well, yeah, that meat's bad for you, yeah, and that meat has the it's second to organ meat, like you just said, because people still don't get that. They think if they just eat a huge salad, they're getting all the nutrients, but
yeah, so it's just not true. So a lot of the nutrients, like yes, I'm not saying plants are bad, or that you shouldn't be eating plants. However, there's nothing that you can't get from animal products, right? And so what I like to think of is, if you want to build a house, right, you need the raw materials to build a house, right? If you were to, like, for instance, eat an animal product, you have the best building blocks because you are an animal and you need to build you, right? So we look at plants, and for instance, the fats from plants have to go through this crazy conversion process that are anywhere from like the omega-3s in plants, for example, you get 0 to 8% of that actually converted into a usable form of DHA, for example, for your brain, right? But in an animal, you get all of that because an animal is just like you, right? So you can actually absorb and assimilate it, and your body doesn't have to go through all these conversion steps. Right. It does matter, the quality, to a certain extent. So like all the micronutrients and good stuff are typically in fat of an animal, only if it's wild or grass-fed, right? But also damaging aspects of meat can be also in the fat if it's a really poor quality. Right. And so this is where I think people have to be careful. Like if they're getting really high-quality meat, get as fatty of a cut as possible. And if it's low quality meat, get as lean of cut as possible, then you're just getting the protein.
Yeah, that's great advice. Yeah. So talk a little bit more about people who think that, and then there was that whole big thing, I don't know if it was a year ago or 2 years ago, meat's horrible for you, it causes cancer and all that.
Right, well, and none of the studies actually show that. Right. It's just complete bogus information. And it's just like misinformation completely. Like we survived as humans, and they've done tracer studies of this, of like every species of hominid, showing that humans ate 90 to 95% of animal products for their entire life. And like look at populations who traditionally do this, there's no rate of chronic disease. Like the problem that people are getting with this stuff is like it's an associative study, if anything. And so let's say it's like a self-reported thing, and it says people eat 3 times as much meat who have colon cancer, for example. Well, they're not including the fact that those people also said that they smoked and drank and were stressed out and hated their job and didn't work. Like it's a very associative thing. Yeah. So people generally in those survey studies just are not healthy people. It doesn't mean that the meat's bad and meat's what's causing it.
Yeah.
You know, maybe those people also wore brown shoes over black. Does that mean brown shoes leads to colon cancer? No,
Right.
of course not. And so that's where like there's no actual research that says that the stuff is bad for you. And this is where like it just goes completely out of left field, and you get all these just propaganda of, you know, animals are getting tortured, and then people say that, well, that means animals are bad for you. Like, say, okay, we don't have to have conventional farming, right? I don't support that either.
Yeah.
I buy all my meat in local ranches. So I was in the Bay Area recently, and I got a ranch, like Stemple Creek Ranch is a farm that I use there. I just moved to Austin. I found a farm that like everything is like the best life you can imagine for these animals. And so like, this is another thing, but it doesn't mean that the meat's unhealthy. It just means that like you have a problem with the way most of the meat is produced in the country.
Yeah.
And that is, again, another situation, another problem entirely.
Let's talk a little bit about your evolution through, I'm sure you've tried a bunch of different diets throughout the years, and kind of what led you to settling on what you do and what you believe in most now.
Right. So I would say that I'm not really settled on anything.
Okay. You're always experimenting.
I'm always trying to learn. Like,
yeah.
And I assume that in 10, 15 years from now, I'm probably gonna be doing something different than I am now.
Sure.
Like, I don't believe in like ever figuring out one thing for the rest of my life.
Okay.
But I think there are some constants that I think that I'll hold. For instance, a whole food nutrition, and just getting nutrition from things that grow. Like, it's just a very simple concept that when I got it, I was like, oh, duh.
Yeah.
Like, you shouldn't be making things that aren't things that grow. Like, it's just very, very simple. And so, like I said, I was actually very, very overweight when I was younger. And so I had tons of health problems. I grew up in the Midwest, and it wasn't a fault of my parents or anything like that, but it was just a function of lack of education. And so things were just normal convenience foods for Americans. Made me super obese when I was younger, super unathletic, very inflamed, tons of health problems. And then I had to figure out on my own, like through science classes and reading books, like, okay, this is not right. Like, why am I overweight? I want to like stop getting picked on and like have a girlfriend.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, need to figure this out.
Right.
And so I started doing that, and then moved to more of a traditional, at the time, like late 90s, early 2000s, like a whole grain, low fat type of like what was quote unquote healthy at the time.
Yeah.
Right. And so doing that, you know, was able to shed some weight, things like that, but I still had acne, I still had gut problems. You know, I wasn't as overweight because I cut out a lot of the processed foods, but I was still eating really hard carbohydrate, not a lot of fat, and having a lot of problems with that. It wasn't until I started experimenting with like a paleo diet that I saw the most amount of success, and like all the problems I had after that completely went away.
Yeah.
And so
You hear that a lot.
yeah, and so just removing grains in general, you know, when we go back to that food scale, we look at, you know, organ meats up here, then lean meats, and then herbs and spices, and then vegetables, and then fruits, and then way at the bottom are things that are colorless, like grains, right? And so there's a debate that people like to either fight against whether grains are harmful for you, for your gut, same reason I talked about before, for like the processed chemicals, or they're not, whatever, doesn't matter. They're the lowest on the totem pole of food and nutrition.
Yeah.
And so if you're choosing those foods and having a high grain diet, you're just missing out on other nutrients.
Right.
That's just a simple fact. And so there is like in my instance, so when I was doing functional medicine stuff and got into that, I started testing myself to see how I responded. And there's a bunch of stuff in grains that I respond to personally. One of them is called tissue transglutaminase 4, which is expressed in the skin. And so it's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. Every time I eat wheat, I have acne. Every time.
Yeah.
And like that holds true to now. I don't get tons of gut problems, but like everyone reacts differently to wheat. People think that like it's just you have like a celiac disease. Like when you go to see a doctor and you get tested for wheat, example, you're tested for 2 of like 20 some proteins, right? Having a full functional medicine panel on this stuff, you can find these different proteins that, okay, maybe this is in, you know, my muscle tissue or my ability to recover or intestines or whatever. Like there are different areas of your body that things like this can affect. And so for me, I think that just removing grains entirely and eating things that, for instance, if you left out something on the counter, it should spoil within a couple of weeks, right?
And what about white rice?
So this is
That's the kind of gray area.
yeah. So this is a thing where I think of like, obviously there's some exceptions.
I don't think anyone's going to argue that it's a source of nutrition, but it's just fuel for exercise and recovery.
And so there's a certain point where like if you're looking at food as a tool, like athletes that I've worked with in the past, like they need to eat stuff like white rice to fuel their performance. So it's like you have to do it. Whereas you think about the stuff that's damaging in grains and whole grains is the stuff around the actual starch, right? And so this is the plant's defense mechanism. That is, so if a bird eats it, the bird poops it out and it goes into a plant and it grows up, right?
Yeah.
And so what we do with white rice is basically take that off and it's just the starch, right? So you're just basically getting pure carbohydrate.
Yeah.
And so if you try to do that with sweet potatoes, for instance, and you're an athlete that works out 2-3 times a day or like these crazy long training sessions, good luck. Like you're never going to be able to get that amount down.
No,
like
it's impossible.
Never.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a good tool if you need to increase carbohydrate count.
Okay.
But like I'm not against it by any means, but there's like obviously going to be some gray area stuff here, like coconut oil, right? That doesn't spoil in 2 weeks. Like I have this as a loose framework, but there's always people who are like, well, this doesn't, like, what about a nut? Like, yeah, sure, like whatever, like it's fine. But generally speaking, things that grow and are in its natural state, like if you were to get a kernel of wheat without processing that thing, you can't eat it. Like, it'll break your teeth.
Right.
Yeah. And so stuff like that, like even nuts. Think about like a walnut or something like that. Have you ever seen like a real walnut in a shell?
Yeah.
Yeah. Like think about having to smash that open if you didn't have a tool.
Right.
Right. Do you think you should be eating like handfuls of that at a time?
Right.
Probably
totally.
not. Right. Yeah. Same thing. So like that's how I view nutrition is like eating more of the stuff that's abundantly available that actually grows. And now after I'm past that stage and like things that aren't in that type of framework don't even look like food to me. They look like this glass sitting next to me. Right. And so that was obviously a long time to make those changes. And now it's trying to tweak macronutrients and certain micronutrients to see how I best feel and perform due to whatever my goal is at the time.
Yeah.
And so let's say it's mental performance, which it is now because my companies are growing so fast and I need to be on the ball all the time.
Yeah.
Well, I found a ketogenic diet works really, really well for me because it fuels the brain preferentially over carbohydrates.
So you notice a significant difference.
9 day.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I go now in and out of it because I'm traveling a lot. So sometimes like I was in France a couple months ago and I'm going to eat croissants and stuff in France.
Yeah.
Right? Or a lot more carbohydrates.
Yep.
There, I just noticed that day to day, trying to work, I wasn't as creative. I wasn't sharp. Energy levels weren't there. And so like now, like it's a per goal basis. If my intention right now is to like build a lot of muscle mass or do something like very physical, very intense, I think that'd be a very bad approach to nutrition.
Yeah.
However, my framework of like eating real food wouldn't change.
Okay.
Does this make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that it's always going to change, but I'm going to learn better tools and put them in my toolbox. And so let's say in 15 years from now, maybe my goals are changed, but I've learned throughout the way, like, okay, I can use whole foods in this combination and this timing and use fasting and like protein at this time, and my body's going to respond this way. And so that's why I think like I'm always learning what works for me at certain times for certain reasons.
Right. I like that. So what if you wanted to always be super sharp mentally, but still you were doing, I don't know, training for something? Like what would be the balance be if you wanted to also have physical performance and like carry a little bit more muscle mass or something like that?
I guess the question would be like, what's the most important thing?
Yeah.
So what's the scenario here? Give me a hypothetical.
Okay, so you're in meetings and business all day, but you also, I don't know, you got to roll on a movie and you need to gain 10 pounds the next month.
Is this are you asking for a friend type of question or what?
No. I'm just throwing something out there. Like I'm just wondering like how you would balance the fat and the carbs and whatnot, and like how you would tweak things.
That's where a lot of these newer products and supplements that are coming out.
Well, yeah,
I think
that's
very,
kind of what
very
I was
effective.
interested in. Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to plug my own stuff
no,
at all. But,
no, I think that's an interesting concept though.
This is where I also use a lot of this stuff, and people ask me how I use their own products that I create. And so exogenous ketones, for example. So ketosis, for people who aren't familiar, is just the breakdown of fat for energy. And so that's a ketone. And so glucose is just the breakdown of carbohydrates for energy, and your body's running primarily on one or the other. It kind of switches back and forth. You're never completely on one or the other, but it's kind of in a zone, one or the other, right? And it's usually whatever you eat most of. And so if you eat mostly fat, then you're running on ketones. If you eat mostly carbohydrate, then you're running on glucose. In a high intense world, if you're trying to have a lot of muscle mass, you can do that on a ketogenic diet, but it's not as easy. And for me, like I used to be overweight. So when I try to gain muscle mass, it just comes with fat, and I can't do anything about it. Yeah. Right. My body doesn't store it well. And so but if I don't do that, then I don't gain muscle mass either. And so I need to do that, and I need to gain some fat if I want to gain some muscle mass. That's just the way it is. But for me, doing it on a ketogenic diet is almost impossible. Like I need those carbohydrates to push those amino acids into my cells and increase those levels of muscle building, right?
So I just want to set the premise here because we were discussing a little before, I wanted to save it for the show, but other guests have said in the past that if you could be in ketosis yet also eat a little bit more carbs than normal, that would be like the ultimate in performance.
Right.
So
yeah, and so that's where I think use of compounds like an MCT oil, MCT oil powders, or exogenous ketones, you can ramp up ketone levels while also having carbs in your bloodstream, so you can have kind of a dual fuel system.
Okay.
Right? There's some concern right now. People are saying like, well, there's no point in human history where like you should have both as fuel systems. Well, having ketones in your bloodstream is a very self-regulated thing. If your body doesn't want to use them, you'll just pee them out. Like there's no downside. There's no side effect.
Yeah.
There's a lot of upside though. So there's all this research coming out that ketones can be used as signaling molecules. They can help lower blood glucose. They can lower inflammation. They can reduce anxiety. But another like a great thing that why I use them, especially if I have carbohydrates, is even in the presence of carbohydrate, your heart and your brain will preferentially take ketones as a fuel source. And so what that means is that, let's say you have a blended activity where you're doing endurance work and strength work, right? You want to have carbohydrates in your bloodstream to fuel the strength work in your muscles and the turnover on that aspect. But you also want your heart to be able to efficiently pump and get oxygen through your lungs out to the rest of your bloodstream, right? And so your heart will work better with ketones in your system, and also your body and your muscles work much better with carbohydrates in your system. Same thing with the brain. The brain will not take up glucose if you have ketones in your bloodstream. It will take ketones preferentially because they can cross the blood-brain barrier and be used as a much cleaner fuel source with less oxygen. And so then if you have, if you're running on carbohydrates, you don't have tons of ketones in your blood, taking that will help put your body, especially your brain, into a much more efficient energy system, which for me is like, it's like turning the lights on. It's like I had no clarity before, and it's just like everything is just super, super clear, and I can just work for nonstop time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So some of my employees, when they first started working and taking the products, like, holy shit, I feel like I'm on drugs. Like, did you give me Adderall or something? I'm like, no. This is just like how your brain works on a ketogenic diet. And so like, that's one of the
and
main
then they
reasons.
were eating carbs too? Like,
Yeah. Drinking beer and stuff like that.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Nice.
That's how I use it currently. But I mean, you're looking at performance blending, some mental performance, inflammation reduction, anxiety reduction, things like that, that are just, it's better.
Talk about anxiety reduction a little more.
Yeah. So
why that happens?
Yeah. So we don't actually know that well right now, but they've done tons of studies, and for instance, like on rats, where they have a little walkway where they go out on, and rats that ate just carbs like will not walk out on it, and like they'll be very scared, or like they won't engage in social settings and things like that. When giving ketones with carbohydrates, these rats are like brave as hell. And so they will go out and they will do any social setting. They will go out and they will go to the edge of a plank and like stand right over water and look over. It's very fascinating. Like, and so the hypothesis is that it's just more energy to your brain and in different pathways, causing different cascades as signaling molecule in your brain.
Okay.
So yeah, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
So if people could be using that instead of antidepressant drugs, instead of other stuff, like breakdown of fat that your body actually already is built to use, obviously much better than a medication.
What about any nutritional practices or supplements related to ADHD?
So this would
similar.
This would be the same exact pathway. Yeah.
That's what I figured. Interesting. And how long ago did you first start experimenting with ketogenic diets?
Ketogenic diet for me first started in undergrad. So that was 9 years ago now.
Okay.
10 years ago. So me and a buddy of mine who was, he's a crazy biochemist, like super bright guy. Well, it was getting close to summertime. We wanted to get shredded up. We're like, okay, what would we do if looking at a cellular level, what would work the best? So it's like, okay, how does beta oxidation work? So how does liberation of fat cells work? And how does lipolysis work? And so we looked through all of our chemistry textbooks and basically like reverse engineered what a diet would be. And it looked just exactly like a ketogenic diet.
Huh.
Yeah. And so we just ate essentially like fatty meat, as fatty as possible. And we didn't know as much about like gluconeogenesis. Like sometimes if you eat too much protein, you can kick you out of ketosis. But it was essentially just fat and a little bit of protein. So it looked a lot like a ketogenic diet, and it worked really, really well. And so like this is not a thing like we had no idea. I mean, we mentioned it to some other people and like, oh yeah, you're doing Atkins diet. I'm like, yeah, I don't know, kind of, not really, but yeah. And so like that was the first sampling for me in a ketogenic diet.
Okay.
Obviously, it's a lot different now. Like the accessibility to it is way easier now, and we know like, okay, you need to have way more fat. Like I was probably also under eating a drastic amount, and so like that obviously with fat loss was paired really well. An interesting study that I just found though is that in a state of ketosis, you will preserve muscle loss at basically ketones themselves are very anti-catabolic, so they'll stop muscle breakdown. So your body doesn't ask for fuel from muscle tissue in the absence of, I guess, an energy abundance. So like you can undereat and eat lower in calories and not have that catabolic effect that you would on a traditional low calorie diet. Also, your energy, your basal metabolic rate does not change when you lower calories in a ketogenic diet. And this is because your body has instant access to unlimited fuel, for example. Like a really lean individual has roughly 150,000 calories of stored body fat, like a really lean male, for example. Whereas they have maybe 1,500, 2,000 calories of stored glycogen in their muscles and their liver, which if you go to zero on that, I mean, you're going to fall over, you're going to faint. And so your body doesn't need to break down your muscle tissue, and it doesn't need to decrease its energy demands because it has an essentially unlimited supply. And so there's actually research coming out now to prove that and to show that you can reduce your calories drastically or increase them and not gain tons of weight, or decrease them and not mess up your metabolism. So this is like crash diets where people go on them and then they ruin their metabolism, like all these horror stories that you heard before. Just doesn't apply in a true ketogenic diet, which is fascinating.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
So I just noted a couple things I want to ask you about. One is you mentioned the Atkins diet there, and I'm sure you probably hear and see all the time, people, like we were talking about earlier, I'm on a ketogenic diet, I'm just eating cheese dipped in butter and wrapped in bacon. Talk about why that's not the best idea. And then I also want to address the protein thing on a ketogenic diet, because for years I had heard that people were like, oh, you got to keep your protein lower, you won't get into ketosis, and blah, blah, blah. And now there's a couple guys, I'm not going to name names, but who are promoting ketogenic diets for bodybuilding. They're like, no, you got to just have the protein jacked up like you would in a normal bodybuilding diet. So let's talk about the Atkins and the fried cheese first, and then address the protein.
So Atkins is not a ketogenic diet. And the reason for that is because they're not concerned about fat levels. It's just basically a no-carb diet. And so you can have a no-carb diet that's not focused on food quality, that's not focused on food amounts. And so you need to increase your fat on a ketogenic diet, or else your body has nothing to use for fuel. It has some body fat, but you need to be eating fat if you want your body to be burning fat. And so a ketogenic diet stresses that 80 to 85% traditionally in a ketogenic diet, fuel needs to be coming from fat sources. Whereas in an Atkins style, people will just go eat, tons of meat and not care about fat at all, or they'll eat very, very low quality. And so if you're eating only meat and not fat, your body goes, okay, well, we can turn this protein into carbohydrates, like you were saying, we'll get to, and then that can be used as glucose, as fuel. And so you're robbing it of carbohydrates and using a very inefficient pathway to make carbohydrates, but you're not using fat. And so this is where people say like, oh, I've done keto, I've done Atkins, and it didn't work for me.
I've seen people do that and they just lose muscle, they don't get lean, and they feel like shit.
And so if people do carb cycling, if they don't increase their fats and then running just on protein and gluconeogenesis, then yes, those things will happen. They won't have any energy. They'll break down their muscles, because that's another thing. If your body's looking for glucose and doesn't have any from any protein you ate, well, your muscles are made of protein, so it breaks down your muscles to turn that into carbohydrates. So you need to have a high amount of fat, or else you will not be in a ketogenic state. And so that's critical. Number two, like you said, the people who just dip shitty fats into just ridiculous things and then chow that down, or like post on Instagram, like the most disgusting things, and like hashtag keto. I was like, it's absurd, right? And the reason for that is, in my opinion, like fat quality is more important than micronutrients to some degree. So every cell in your body is made of fat. And so you have a layer on the outside that is made of a phospholipid bilayer. So that's what your cell is made of. So think about your cell as like a beach ball, right? That lining of the beach ball is made of fat entirely, phospholipid bilayer. It's lipid fat. And so everything that your cells use to communicate, everything that goes in the cell and out the cell, and all the communication in between your cells comes from the cell lining. And so if you have really bad fat, you're going to use that to make really bad cell walls, right? And so think about instead of having a nice big beach ball that can communicate and receive and export things in and out of the cell, that gets crumpled up like a piece of paper. And now you have the receptors that need to be expressed in a cell that are in these caverns, or in next to broken fats, next to a broken cell wall. Not good, right? You're not going to perform well if you're made of broken parts. And so what happens is that those cell walls and that phospholipid bilayer takes about 2 years to replace entirely. And so what that means is that if you're eating bad quality fats, even for like every other meal, you're like basically a trailing 2-year debt of the quality of fat that you're eating for how you're performing, which is insane, right?
Crazy.
It takes 2 years to turn all those cells over.
That's nuts.
And so cheat meals, don't buy them. Like one, they can destroy your gut lining. Your gut lining takes 7 days to repair. Okay.
So that's funny because you hear that a lot where people will be like, oh, dude, I was super strict Monday through Saturday.
Yeah.
And then you're saying they're basically crushed. If
well,
they
the weekly cheat meal, like, so then you get a once a week. That's 104 meals for a 2-year span that you're using as poor building blocks. Plus, if you ruin your gut lining, like it takes about 7 days for your gut lining to repair. Yeah. So then your gut lining is going to be repaired, and then you're basically going to hit it again. Yeah. And then you just are always in this constant state of inflammation in your gut. Mm-hmm. And so food quality.
And certain things like gluten last longer than that, right?
Yeah. So it just depends, obviously, on the types of food. But even if it's something as simple as, like, I know people like try to eat limited cherry turnovers on so you're getting sugar, inflammatory fats, like all this different stuff. So it's just awful. It's like the quality of the fat is so important for a very long period of time, like 2 years. Like every meal matters to some degree. Yeah. And so that's how I think about it when I make the food choices. Like, okay, this choice is not a cheat meal from now. Like I have to live with this meal for 2 years. Yeah. Like, are you comfortable with that with the food you're eating?
That's amazing. Now, do you prefer a certain ratio of unsaturated fat, saturated fat? Do you have any favorite fat sources?
Animal products. Okay. Yeah. So high quality animal products are always going to be the most nutrient dense fat sources.
Do you rank them or just a mix?
If you can get like wild animals, that would be the best.
But I mean like beef, salmon, or
right. So like for instance, a cow is very domesticated, and we can't really have wild cows. So some of the farms that I know of, like, put them on this grass and then that grass and like sweet clover and oat and rye, and like do a really good job getting them a really diverse diet. Mm-hmm. But for instance, if you get like a wild elk, that's eating all these herbs and brushes and like had to run away from animals and had these stresses in their lives that like made them a very resilient animal, you're gonna have much more nutrients in that than you would a cow that's been domesticated, right? So like that's just a breed that we've made over a long period of time. So traditionally, wild meat will be better for you. However, it's just a period of access. Like I can't really get wild meat unless I go out and hunt in Texas. It's illegal to sell it, and so at that point, it's like, well, if I can't really do it that easily, then it's like, get what you can get, right? And so like grass-fed, like lamb or bison or beef, like those are all kind of like up on the highest amount in my opinion.
Okay. So obviously then, because there, like you mentioned with dairy before, where there's split camps, when it comes to saturated fat, there's some camps that are like, you should only eat saturated fat. You know, there's people that take that hard stance, like, oh, don't even mess with unsaturated fat at all. And then some people like, where do you stand on that?
Yeah. So this is again where you have a camp that says all or nothing. Yeah. Yeah. And a camp that says like you should never do it. Right. And so again, I think this is a very blended approach, and it's a very individual thing. And so there's certain polymorphisms, like genetic differences in people, where you may not be able to process saturated fat. I may be able to. And so the best way you can do this is generally through what's called a lipid particle test. And so not just a lipid panel where you get cholesterol, LDL, HDL, but we break down the LDL and look at LP little a as well as small LDL particles. And so when you see that, you can see how your body is processing saturated fats over a long period of time. But another kicker to this is that if you eat saturated fats in the presence of carbohydrates, this is like a firestorm. Like, do not do this. So this is where I think a lot of research comes out that says saturated fat is bad. Mm-hmm. It's because they combine saturated fat and carbohydrates that are super inflammatory. Okay. So carbohydrates in themselves like can be utilized or whatever. Same thing with saturated fats. Like either in isolation is fine, but what happens is when you process carbohydrates in your gut with saturated fats, the saturated fat makes a transport mechanism called a chylomicron around the carbohydrate that basically shuttles it around your body, delivering tons of inflammation and problems and glycation all over your body. And so basically you're using the fat as a delivery mechanism for the carbohydrate, which becomes inflammatory in your bloodstream. And so it's not the fat that's a problem, it's what it's containing. And like, so it's like if a boat was coming through a cruise ship and it had a bunch of people on it, tourists, like fine. If it had tons of drugs, it'd be like, okay, this is a problem. We need to stop it. Same thing here with saturated fat. Like, what is the transport that's going to be bringing over? Like, is it a bunch of fat soluble nutrients, like in a grass-fed meat, like eaten without carbohydrates, or is it inflammatory carbs? Yeah. And so this is another thing where you need to like parse it apart and be like, okay, what is the role of the saturated fat? And like, what are you eating it with? I would never recommend anybody to eat saturated fat with carbohydrates. So if you are going to eat a fatty piece of meat, skip the potatoes. eat the potatoes separately and metabolize those things separately, and eat lean meat with your carbohydrates.
Okay.
So that way you're not getting fat with carbohydrates. Worst combination ever.
Okay. Now, what about if you just did that once a week as a cheat meal? Like if you had a burger with like organic sweet potato fries that you made yourself with coconut oil or something.
Right. So like you're talking about with a bun, or what do you?
No, just those two carb sources. It is a saturated fat and carbs together.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to be as bad as eating the shit you mentioned before for 7 days, right?
Yeah. There's always there's going to be a spectrum of things. Like, so it's like smoking 3 cigarettes is better than smoking 2 packs of cigarettes. Like, would smoking 0 be better? Yeah, but sure. I mean, there's always like a kind of a gradient here where you're looking at like food choices. Yeah.
But so a grass-fed burger with sweet potatoes is certainly not as bad as eating.
Correct. Yeah. Well, like if it's a processed carbohydrate and a really refined carbohydrate, the more refined it is, the worse it becomes. Right. Like think about like how damaging and high heat is applied to fats. Like the fat gets rancid plus the carbohydrate, like regular French fries. Yeah. Like if you're baking sweet potatoes, not a big deal. But like if you're frying frozen fries in rancid oil, like worst food ever. Yeah. Like you're getting the carbohydrate load and essentially the huge spike in insulin and blood sugar, and you're getting all this inflammatory fat, and that fat is carrying over that carbohydrate into your bloodstream more efficiently because you had the fat with the carbohydrate. Yep. Terrible combo. Okay. And so like any type of fried food, like it's not one thing, it's like multiple things that combine to make that awful. And so that's where I would say skip on that and like bake the thing, or like eat a baked potato or baked sweet potato instead of like frying it in oil. Yeah.
Let's address the protein issue a little bit.
So what was the question again?
Just protein levels on a ketogenic diet. Some people say they have to be super low, otherwise you can be out of ketosis. And then people say, well, if you're training for performance and bodybuilding, whatever, protein's got to be way higher.
This is another thing I think that's very individual, an individual standpoint. So like there are camps, again, who say like you need protein super high or else you can't gain muscle. And there's camps that say like you need it super low or else you can't get into ketosis. Both people are right. And so the majority of people that are trying to get into ketosis think that they're going to have it all at once immediately. The 300-pound, 57-year-old female who's never worked out in her life, but here's this information that like if you want to like build muscle mass and like be toned, you have to eat this way. It's like she needs to like take things back and like worry about if she's in ketosis or not. Yeah. Versus a camp and a guy like you who's super lean who maybe wants to build muscle tissue. Protein's probably going to be a very important thing for you. But on either end of the spectrum here, just testing it on an individual level and seeing what works for that person definitely is what was recommended for me. Like in my perspective, everyone's a complete individual with this stuff and how they respond to things. So you have different co-transporters in your cells that can make or use ketones or carbohydrates that get upregulated or downregulated depending on your the time in ketosis, for example. And so I've noticed that the longer I'm in ketosis without getting out of it, the more protein I can tolerate before getting kicked out of ketosis, because my body's more efficiently using ketones. Gotcha. And so me at day 4 of a ketogenic diet, maybe I can handle 60 grams a day. Me at day 304, maybe I can handle 140 grams a day. And so it just depends on how long you've been acclimated to the diet. Yeah. So that's another very individual thing. So like that's why I think testing on yourself to see where you lie in the stuff, just like how you tolerate saturated fats, what amounts you can do then, and the split between that and polys and stuff like that is like very important that you just do the homework on yourself. Okay. Yeah.
What is your training like these days?
So I do a lot of gymnastic stuff now. And so it's kind of this interesting split where I try to have at least like 2 to 4 days of strength / hypertrophy work. But I'm traveling a lot. And so doing gymnastics where I have to worry about body awareness and body movement and be patient with myself. And so I was telling you before, like I'm generally not a very patient person. It's like having to train that over a long period of time, like trying to do handstands. Like I've been doing this work for like 8 months now, and I've gone from being very sloppy to doing like a 20-minute or 20 second.
That'd be pretty impressive.
20 seconds, just like falling over like a limp noodle. Like it's just pathetic. But like looking back at it, I'd be like, holy shit, I've made all this progress. Yeah. It's super rewarding, super fun. And it's always something that, you can hack away at. Whereas like I've been lifting weights, since I was a teenager. And I know that if I go in the gym, I'm going to put 5 pounds on this lift, 10 pounds on this week over week, and it's very methodical. Right. And then I hit a point where like it's hard for me to like the incremental gains are too hard mentally for me to handle. And then I'll lose some weight and I'll do the whole process again. Like I know what to expect. Yeah. And so it's not as exciting for me anymore. That's why I still feel good when I keep some size on me. So that's why I still do some strength and hypertrophy stuff, but it's not a linear progression type of mode.
Right.
That's more so in the gymnastics realm. So I'll go in and whatever I feel good on in a day, I'll work. And so like if I feel super primed, I'm starting to use some like HRV, heart rate variability stuff. And it's like whenever that's best, well, then I'm hitting like a heavy leg day, or I'm pulling a lot, or I'm going to do a lot of sled drags. If it's not as much, no, well, then maybe I'll do like a lighter upper body day. And if it's awful, then I'll just do gymnastics and movement work. And so listening to my body a little bit more on that end too, and trying to figure out, just like with nutrition, like I don't think that I'm ever going to figure it out entirely, but it's like the journey and figuring out, okay, this works for me for this reason, and this is why. And doing that now with training has been super fun. It's like I know exactly how I'm going to respond to 5 pounds on my bench every week, right? Yeah. But I don't know how I'm going to respond to gymnastics, or I don't know how I'm going to respond to HRV training and doing that and pairing that together. Right. So it's been fun.
Awesome. Let's just shift gears a little bit, just to wrap it up. Talk a little bit about if you have any kind of daily routines, daily rituals, maybe some tips on productivity.
Big daily routine guy, because I think I told you before we started recording that beginning of last year, I had 7 active companies that I was managing and running. And like, if you don't have routines, like good luck.
Right.
Like I was already like stressed out to the max and like losing it, but like routine to me is so critical. So people who know me will like laugh when I talk about this, but I have this crazy spreadsheet where I track, basically I make at the beginning of the year these goals for every area of my life. It's like personal fitness, personal relationships, personal like spiritual, financial, and then all my businesses are broken down and I have very specific goals. Okay. That is broken down into monthly reviews, and that's broken down into like a daily tracker.
Wow.
Where I have things that I know are going to help me reach my goals on a daily basis, right? So this is a routine of like checking in every day to make sure that I'm going in the right direction. So I think that if you're always improving or like have your mindset in the really small things, those compound over a very long period of time to get you where you want to be. So that's just one crazy part of my routines. But like in the morning, I have a very strict routine where I wake up, do meditation. So I do just a kind of a free form mindfulness type of meditation, like 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. And then I have coffee, and then I do a little bit of a movement routine. So that's some gymnastic stuff now, but just getting the whole body, like moving every joint essentially. And then I do something creative for at least 2 hours. And so that's right now. So I just finished up a book, writing a book, and now it's going through the second edit of that. And so that's just writing and doing that, or what I like to call like a deep work session. And so just doing really undistracted stuff. I don't check my phone. I don't check email. I don't do anything until that session's done with. Then I'll jump on and do like, for instance, like Slack and get to my team and make sure that everyone's taken care of and there's no fires to put out. And then I'll go back into like another deep work session. And so like, that's where I found like those 2 sessions in a day are where, looking back over the course of the last 4 years, like everything has come from. Like nothing ever comes from checking your email.
Yeah. Right.
It all comes from like pulling away from the world and diving in deep on something.
Right.
And like getting that thing done and not having any other distraction. And like setting, like sometimes like writing is just painful for me. I have to set timers and like I look, I'm like, oh, 10 minutes left. I'm like, it's like worse than a workout. Like, and so doing that and like being really strict about that. It's like in my daily tracker, I have 2 columns to track, okay, this deep work session and this deep work session. So I have 2 on there that I usually set like the beginning of the week or as I go through the week, that way I can wake up and know exactly what it is that I'm expected to do that day, and I don't have to decide anything. So I just dive right into it.
That's awesome.
Right? Yeah. And then after that, it's usually workout, and then lunch after that, and then back into like crisis management mode. Okay. Right? And then obviously everything interspersed between that, like whatever random work or meetings kind of go in between that. But I try to always guard the first, let's say, 4 hours of the day. So schedule nothing ever. And like phone's on airplane mode. I do not check it. No social media, no emails, no Slack messages, nothing. It's like, it's very intense. And sometimes it can be like hard to get a hold of, and my team will get pretty pissed at me, but it's effective. And then in the evening, I try to always have like a shutdown time. So I just went through a big moved to Austin. Like a lot of things have been changing, so it's been a little difficult, but I usually try like around 6:37 to not then go basically the whole thing in reverse. Right. And so what that looks like is like computer is done, it's closed, it's shut off. No more emails, no more texts, no more anything, like airplane mode essentially. And then something I didn't mention before also, like before I start writing, like actual creative stuff, I usually do like a little bit of journaling. So like gratefulness type of stuff and like planning out the day and just like anything that's on my mind that can be stressful, boom, gets it on paper, I'll lock it down, and then I revisit that at the end of the day. It's like think about and write down on paper, not on a digital surface. I write down like, okay, what went wrong today, and how could have I made that better, or approach it differently? I think that constant feedback and awareness has like changed everything for me. Nice. And so I do that. I have these Philips Hue lights. They're like best investment ever. You can program them. And so I program to go like complete orange essentially at 8 p.m.
Okay.
And so at that time I'm like, okay, lights have changed. It's time to really shut down. And so at that time, like I make tea, do my little journaling if I haven't done it, do some more movement, like just some nice, 5-10 minute movement session.
Where can you get those lights? I gotta get these.
I think I got them at Home Depot.
Okay.
Best investment I've ever made. Like I want them to sponsor. I think I mentioned them on my podcast last like 5 episodes. Like they're incredible. Okay. So I also program them for so we can get to sleep in a second here, but I program them to turn on blue light whenever the sun rises. It's like you can set them to geolocation. So wherever you are, they turn on as the sun rises. Because if you have blackout curtains at night, well then I wake up all groggy because I don't wake up to the sun.
Yeah.
And so having those on, so I have.
Now, so are these specific? Like, are they just light bulbs, or are they specific kind of lights?
Yeah, so they're light bulbs that they go through the whole spectrum of blue to orange.
But how do you program them?
So it just goes on Wi-Fi to your phone. So you have an app, and then on the app, like from now, I can control my house in Austin. I can just tap a button to change all the lights.
Okay.
And so you can program them in specific times. Like I can program all of my lights in my house at 8 p.m. to go into this deep orange color.
Sick. All right.
Like, so then I have to be a weirdo using the blue blocking glasses.
Yeah, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so I go through that wind down routine, and then in bed, usually by 9, and just reading until whenever I fall asleep. And so then that sets up my morning. And then same thing, I wake up to the lights.
Awesome.
So very, very routine based. Like that's my home routine. And like I have an away routine as well. So like very similar, but just stripped down a little bit. So a lot of times when I'm traveling, I can't have as long, deep morning sessions. Yeah. But like this morning was the same thing. So woke up, meditated, had coffee, wrote a book, did some writing.
Do you have coffee in the room, or do you go out and get it? I'm into hearing all about this, because I know a lot of people who their routine falls apart on the road, and mine's not that great on the road. So
so I stocked up at Erewhon, and I got tons of stuff. So I got coffee to drink there. So like if I were to leave, and go get it and come back, boom, routine's over. Yeah. So nope. Yeah. So I try to say as because then if I did that, I would not go back and start working on any project. Yeah. And so that was what it was like last night, kind of similar, where I was in bed at a certain time, reading. I have an eye mask on the road, so like I don't obviously have blackout curtains. Don't have my fancy lights, so kind of sucks. But yeah, I mean, it's a very similar. Like I try to have like it's essentially a condensed away routine and a home routine, and like following that. Like if I get off on any of these things, it's like a momentum and a chain reaction where like I'll just fall apart. Yep. And then it'll be like a week later, I'm like, I had nothing done. Like mess, complete mess. Crazy. And then it's like starting to building blocks all the way back. And then once I'm on it again, I can just like, I feel like I can just like show up. Yeah. Like I don't have to do any work any day. It's like, it's such an effortless feeling when I have the routine set. It's like I can just wake up and I'll just crush everything in my path. It's amazing. But like if I don't have that, chaos.
Is one of the keys for travel getting an Airbnb versus a hotel room? Yeah, totally.
Yep. So there I'll have a kitchen.
When I have an Airbnb, I can keep my routine. But if I have a hotel room, it's like, this whole thing's falling apart already.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, it's a simple things. Like if you're traveling with anybody, like it's just not easy to meditate around people or like do any of these things, like have your own time. No. It's like, I always need a separate room. It's like just the ability to have a little bit of space, have a kitchen, and like, that is crucial to me. Like, and to be able to feel like you're at home and not traveling is big too. Yeah. The thing that sucks about being in an Airbnb though is that usually whenever I travel and I'm in an Airbnb, then I have to find a gym. Right. But if I'm in a hotel, then the hotel usually has a gym. Like, you know what I mean? It's like it's a little bit of give and take. But yeah.
Cool, man. Well, this was awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Let everyone know everything you got going on, where they can follow you online and find out more.
Yeah, so on Instagram is where I'm most active. That's where I respond to all messages. So that's just at Dr. Anthony Gustin. And then that is also a website. So dranthonygustin.com, and then perfectketo.com and equipfoods.com.
Awesome. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Guys, as always, thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.